Okay, so my name is Abby, and I did my final project on the film and book, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. For this course, I just watched the movie, I didn't read the book, but it is about William Kamkwamba, who is a 13-year-old boy, and his whole goal is that he wants to go to school and earn an education, and he is able to for the beginning portion of the film, but due to an unsuccessful harvest, his dad cannot keep sending him to school, and there's a no-tolerance policy for parents who can't pay because it takes away from the other students whose parents can pay. So he is kicked out of school, but he will wind up sneaking in to keep learning, and he is a very bright young boy, and he has a lot of not inventions, he is very technical, so he fixes radios for people, and he builds things used from the scrap of the tobacco company. And due to the deforestation of their lands, there's terrible flooding, which leads to a famine across their village, and William is able to wind up building a windmill that creates electricity and pumps water so that they can have year-round crops, which effectively saves his village from starvation. So this is just the picture of William and his father from the movie, and the windmill that he built in the background. And you can see it's not like the big windmills that we might know today. It's used, part of a bicycle is used to help keep the motion going. And it's made from wood, and he built it with his village. So some of the critical comments and things that I noticed when it came to how the movie was actually filmed. So I thought it was very impactful that to set context for what is going on, there were clips shown of the African countryside to show the different seasons that they were in. And these aren't your typical fall, winter, spring, summer that we have here in America, but they called one, as you can see down here, the sowing season, which is when they would plant their crops. And then there was the rains, and there's also the dry season, and then one of the seasons was hunger, which is when they ran out of food. And so I think it was just very impactful and helped to orient everybody about what was going on and what to expect during the next portion of the movie after seeing these transition scenes. And I think it was something really good that they did during this film. And also, just the background sounds throughout the film I think were very important. And it sort of ranged. There was obviously dialogue between the characters, as well as cultural music. There were celebrations of death, and just the drums and dancing and music alongside of those really helped to show the culture, and you would not be able to get that without those types of sounds, as well as the sounds of insects, flies, beetles, what I imagine are cicadas, and they all sort of represent something that's happening. So like I said, the cultural music and drums, mostly in the film, they represented a death ceremony, but there were some times where there were song and dance of success and progress forward, as well as the constant buzzing of insects and flies during the heat season, which sort of goes to show that nothing living was outside, and it shows the time of desperation that these people were in. And also, flies specifically sort of represented death. During the first scene, a man dies, and you sort of hear flies as people approach his body, even though it had just happened. And the same happens when William's dog dies. As William approaches his dog, there is fly noises. So without these sounds, I think we would be missing a lot of context for how people are feeling and just how impactful even just the weather and the rain is. I think all of these little sounds really piled up and made it a much more impactful viewing experience. So some cultural significance is, as I was sort of watching this film, I really understood family structures and respect to elders and how important that was to this culture. I don't know what a family dynamic would look like in the rest of this country, but in William's village, it was certainly respect to elders was very, very important. And this can really be seen in one part where William has asked his dad to use the bicycle to make the windmill, and he says no. And he and a couple of his friends go to try to take the bicycle from his father. And if that means, jumping his dad, or attacking, stealing from the father, that is what they're prepared to do. But as they look at William's dad, and ask for the bike, and he's like, "Are you going to attack me?" None of them have anything to say. And I think that it really comes out of respect for elders and people that are superior, well, in a position of authority. And I mean, I think that this is even more evident because there were 5 or 6 of these young men that could have taken on and beaten up William's dad to get the bicycle if that is what they had set their minds to, even though William's dad was holding a farming tool. But they decided not to, even though they could have. And I think, like I said, it just goes to show the respect of authority figures. And additionally, I noticed gender roles were very strong and very traditional with this village. William's sister is dating his teacher, and this is something that is very scandalous, and they are not supposed to be dating or seeing each other without a more official process. So the teacher is supposed to provide a bride payment for her hand to be able to date and marry her, which he doesn't have, and so eventually they run away together. But at the time, it's very scandalous, and it is a very male-driven, patriarchal village, and you can sort of see this because William's mother asks his sister if any boys were talking to her, not if she was talking to any boys. So you can just sort of see how it was very male-driven. And this also there were men that broke into William's house when there were no men home, and his mother and sister were both terrified of what could happen just because a man was there. And they only wanted food, but they were terrified of what could have happened. And I think this is very interesting and leads me to be more curious about how relationships around the world work. I recently watched a TED Talk in my anthropology class about different types of marriages and relationships, and the video that is linked below, it talks specifically about polyandry, which is when a woman has 2 or more husbands at a time. And it's just very interesting that within this culture and the TED Talk, they are very accepting and open of all types of relationships. And while polyandry is accepted, that's not the only set type. But it does seem that with William's village that it is man and woman, and it is a much more formal process of giving a dowry and courting and all sorts of things like that. No sex before marriage, obviously. And that's just not how all cultures work. So I found that very interesting. So I was not able to relate to this film in a very drastic way. I have grown up very privileged, and while it wasn't always easy for my family, we never had a hard time finding food or having somewhere to live, which was a big struggle. Finding food was one of the biggest struggles throughout this film, as well as having an education, which is something that I have never struggled with. There has always been school for me to go to. K through 12 was paid for. I talk about that a little bit more. That's free. But I'll get into that a little bit more in the next question. But the biggest thing that I was able to relate to was William's curiosity and in inventing things, because that is something that I liked to do as a kid, and I still enjoy fixing things. It's just a hobby. I've never really done anything. I've never done anything great the same way William has. I don't mess with electricity very much. I've been electrocuted one too many times. But, yeah, I'm not able to relate to the struggles that we're seeing on screen and in real life, because I've grown up very privileged. But I was really able to feel for it. Like, my heart reached out to the people in the film, and they were just actors, let alone the real people who went through this. And I think that just goes to show how well the film did at showing the struggles that these people went through. And then some of the biggest differences I noticed during the film was the role between men and women, as well as education and respect. All of these sort of exist in varying degrees to me in my cultural experience. But they were all more severe, I suppose, than what I have been used to. my parents certainly taught me to respect my elders, and my timer disappeared. Okay, well, sorry. My parents certainly taught me to respect my elders and themselves also, but it was always more in a lax form, and it came naturally to me, as opposed to where this seems like it was something that just was ingrained in these children's head, and that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that respect of elders was something that was much more severe. I'm able to joke around with my parents in a way I don't think William would ever be able to joke around with his parents. And not that that's a good or bad thing, but it just shows a different level of respect. And my role as a woman is different than the role of a woman seen in this village. And despite some pushback against that within William's own family, I never grew up thinking all I was going to be was a wife and a mother. I've always known that I can do whatever I set my mind to. And also the lack of education and free schooling was something that I found to be very different, and we saw more examples of this in the First Grader film that we watched a couple weeks back in this class. But it's just very interesting to me how many countries still don't have free education, and this film took place in 2001. That's when everything was happening, and it's just very interesting that that's the same year I was born, and I never had to face the struggles of receiving an education that William had to. But the biggest similarity I saw was the love that William's mother had for him and her family, because my mom is the same way, where she would do anything for me, my brother, and my dad. And so while that might not be cultural for everybody, that is something that I do identify with being part of my culture, because to me, loving my family and having familial love it's a big part of my identity, and I wouldn't be who I am today without their love and support. So that is the biggest thing that I saw similarities in.